I never imagined that asking out my best friend would end with me standing in a chapel in a white dress, but that is exactly where this story lands. So let me start from the very beginning and tell you everything, because the path I walked was not the path I ever thought I would walk, and the destination was so far from where I started that the person who began this journey would never have recognized the one who finished it. My name, the one I was given at birth, is something I have not spoken in public for a long time now, and the name I answer to today was not even a daydream back then. It was something locked in a deeper place, somewhere softer, somewhere I had been told I was not allowed to go. So I will tell you the story under the softer name, and let the older one rest where it has always rested, in the back of a closet I no longer open. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knew your family's business before you knew it yourself, and I grew up feeling, in ways I could not name to anyone, like I was wearing a costume I had not picked out. I was a kid who liked a lot of things that the other boys in my class did not seem to like, and many of the things they loved left me cold, but I learned early to nod and to laugh along and to say the right words at the right time so that nobody would look at me too closely. I learned to mimic, to parrot, to survive. There was a softer feeling inside me that I could not put a word to then, something that looked like the girls on the television and the women in the magazines and the mothers at school pickup, something that looked like the way a flower looks at the sun, and I wanted, in a way I did not yet understand, to be seen the way they were seen, but every time I tried to peek at that wanting, the world whispered that I was not the kind of person who got to have that wanting, so I closed the door on it, and tried to grow into the shape I had been handed. Through grade school and middle school, and that strange liminal stretch called high school, I built a working version of myself, a version that could play soccer badly without anyone caring, that could grunt at the right moments, that could keep a straight face when the locker room talk turned cruel, that could shut up and not ask for the dress-up days that the girls always seemed to get to enjoy. I had one great friend, or rather, I had one true friend, and her name was Ren. I want to give her a name because she is the heart of the story, and from the moment she and I shared a milk carton in second grade, we became something that no one in our small town really understood. We were the pair that walked down the hallway together, the pair that worked on every group project side by side, the pair that finished each other's sentences in that annoying way that made the teachers roll their eyes but secretly smile. Ren was, and I say this with a love I have come to name clearly in the last few years, the kind of person who made the world feel less sharp. She was small and quick and had this laugh that came out like a secret she kept giving away, and she dressed a little differently than the other girls, usually in flannels and combat boots and a haircut that hovered somewhere between rebellious and elegant, and when she came out as a lesbian halfway through junior year, the world we lived in did not know what to do with her, so it did what small towns always do, which is to talk about her in the hallways when she was not there. I was one of the few people who never joined in, not because I was brave, but because she was the only person who had ever made me feel like the costume I was wearing might not be the only costume available to me, the only person who asked me real questions and waited for real answers, the only person who, when I cried over something I could not explain, would sit next to me and not try to fix it, just sit, just be there. When Ren came out, our friendship did not break. It deepened, and over the senior year we became the kind of inseparable that looks weird to outsiders. Two people who ate lunch together every day, who walked to class together, who drove around in her beat-up Civic listening to music that I pretended to like, but secretly loved. I would call her my best friend in front of everyone, and I still mean those words, but there was something else happening inside me that I could not name, a feeling that wanted more, that wanted the language of more, that wanted to be the person she brought home to her family rather than the friend she brought home, that wanted to be the shoulder she cried on in a way that was closer, that wanted a kind of closeness I had no map for. I convinced myself for years that this feeling was just love, just friendship, just admiration, just the intimacy of having one person who really knew me, and I kept telling myself that until I nearly convinced myself that it was true, and I would have kept telling myself that for the rest of my life if Ren had not done the brave thing first. The twist, the one that broke the door open, came at the end of our senior year, after graduation, on a night that I want to tell you about in detail because it is the hinge on which everything swings. We were sitting on the roof of her parents' garage, watching the fireworks from some neighboring town cast their faint echoes against the clouds, and I was holding a can of something I was too young to drink, but was drinking anyway, and she was laughing about how the colors kept smearing into the sky like wet paint, and I looked at her, and I said, in the most casual voice I could muster, "Hey, so, do you want to go out sometime, like just us?" The silence that followed was not the kind I had expected. I had prepared for a laugh, for a tease, for an awkward moment where she would say something like, "We already go out, weirdo," and the moment would pass, and we would go back to drinking our terrible canned drinks. What I got instead was a stillness that lasted maybe 3 seconds, but felt like 3 years, and then Ren turned her head, and her eyes were not full of the amusement I was expecting. They were full of something I had never seen in them before, something that looked like hope, something that looked like recognition, something that looked like she had been waiting for me to say those words for a long time and had almost stopped believing they would ever come. She did not say yes, not right away. She said very slowly, very carefully, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so. I mean, as serious as I know how to be right now." And she said, "Because if you're joking with me right now, I will never forgive you, not ever, not for the rest of my life." And I said, "I am not joking, Ren. I really like you. I have liked you for longer than I knew I was liking you, and I would like to take you out like a date, like a real date, like the kind where you let me pay, and you let me open the car door for you." And she laughed then, but the laugh was different. It was the kind of laugh that is half-cry, the kind that escapes when the body does not know what else to do with the weight that just lifted, and she said yes. Now, the catch, the part of the story that you have to hold on to, the part that even Ren did not know at that moment, and would only discover after a few more weeks, is that when I said the word date, I was not picturing myself in the costume the world had given me. I was picturing something else. I was picturing the date that I had been secretly, quietly, deeply imagining for years, the kind of date where I would sit across from Ren in a dress that I had never told anyone I wanted, and she would look at me the way she had always looked at me, and the costume would have fallen away, and something truer would be standing in its place. That secret dream was something I had never spoken out loud, something I had buried under years of pretending, something that I had tried to drown in sports and bad jokes and the right clothes and the right voice and the right walk. When I asked Ren out on that roof, the date I was really asking her on was not a date in the costume, it was a date in the truth, and I did not yet know how I was going to make that date happen, but I had taken the first step. I had said the words out loud, and the words did not go back into my mouth when I tried to swallow them. The next few weeks were strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Ren and I started going out, and by going out I mean the kind of thing where she would pick me up and we would drive into the larger town 40 minutes away, and we would go to a cafe that had a bookshelf in the back, and we would sit for hours and talk about the books we were reading and the lives we were not yet living, and sometimes we would walk around the shops. And I would let myself drift behind her in the women's section just long enough to touch the fabrics, just long enough to feel what it would be like to pick something out, just long enough to hear her voice say, "You would look really pretty in that color," before I laughed it off and pretended I was joking. She never pushed, she never pried. She just kept saying things like that, natural things, easy things, things that made my heart do something between a skip and a gallop, and I realized after a few weeks that when Ren was with me, the costume was not as airtight as it had been when I was alone. Something about her presence made the truth want to come out. Something about the way she saw me made the pretending collapse. The night that the truth came out, the night that I will tell you about with as much honesty as I can find in me, was the night of our third date. We had gone to a movie, some comedy I have now forgotten the name of, and after we had driven back to the garage roof, she had asked if I wanted to try something with her, something she called a closet day, where she would pull out some of her old clothes and I would try them on and we would take pictures and laugh about how ridiculous I looked in them, the kind of thing best friends do all the time. Except I had never quite been anyone's best friend in this way, and I had never sat with a girl on a roof with a bag of clothes between us, and so when she unzipped the duffel and pulled out the first item, a soft gray sweater that smelled like her, my hands were shaking in a way I could not hide. I tried the sweater on, and she said, "You look so soft. Oh my goodness, you look so soft," and I could not fight the smile that came over my face. It was the smile of someone being seen for the first time, and the sweater felt, against my skin, like a permission slip I had been waiting for my entire life. She pulled out another item, and another, a denim skirt that fell just above my knees, a blouse with tiny flowers on it, a pair of tights that were surprisingly comfortable, and she kept talking me into each one, and I kept letting her, and somewhere in the middle of it, I was not laughing anymore, I was crying, and Ren saw it, and Ren did not ask why I was crying. She just handed me another item and said, "I think you would look beautiful in this." I will not lie to you. I looked absolutely ridiculous at first, The way any person looks when they're trying on clothes that do not fit the shape they have been told they are. But the longer I stood in front of her bedroom mirror, with her standing behind me, with her hands gently adjusting the collar, with her laughing at how my shoulders slowly relaxed into the fabric, the more the reflection in the mirror stopped looking like a friend playing dress up and started looking like something else. The reflection was looking back at me, and the reflection was not asking for my permission to exist. The reflection was just there, like a person standing at a door waiting to be let in. Ren, when she saw my face in the mirror, did not gasp, did not laugh, did not say any of the things you see in those over-dramatized moments in movies. She just looked at me for a long time, and then she said, very quietly, with a kind of tenderness that makes the air around you feel thicker, "Hi." That was the moment the truth got a voice. I said, "Hi," back, and my voice was small and soft and high, and not the voice the world had taught me to use. It was the other voice, the one I had been keeping in a safe inside my chest since I was old enough to know what a voice was, and I let it out, and Ren did not flinch, and Ren did not pull away, and Ren asked me, after a few minutes, in that same quiet voice, "Have you ever wanted to wear this outside the mirror?" I said, in a voice that came out like a confession, "Yes." I said, "Yes, Ren, I have wanted to wear this outside the mirror every single day of my life." I said, "I have wanted to wear this outside the mirror since I was 5, and my mother put me in a tutu for Halloween, and the only time I ever felt like myself was in that tutu." I said, "I have wanted to wear this outside the mirror since I was in 7th grade, and I cried in your bathroom because I thought I was broken." I said, "I have wanted to wear this outside the mirror every time I have stood in front of a department store and looked at the women's section and felt something move inside me that I have been told does not exist." Ren did not interrupt me. Ren let me speak, and when I was done speaking, I felt empty, like I had just given something away, like I had just lost a part of myself and gained something else. And then Ren said, "Do you want to go outside like this right now with me?" And I said yes, and we held hands, and we walked out the back door of her parents' house, and we walked down the driveway, and we walked to the end of the street, and we stood under the street lamps, and we held hands, and I was in a skirt and a blouse. And I was crying, and she was crying, and the neighbors who saw us did not seem to notice anything unusual because it was late, and small towns go to bed early, and the world was quiet and gentle, and ours. The next few months after that are a blur of learning how to be a person instead of a costume. Ren became my mirror, my teacher, my advocate, my protector, and she is still, to this day, the one who made it possible for me to imagine a future as myself. She taught me about makeup, not in the kind of flashy Instagram way, but in the soft, careful, wipe off and start over way. She taught me how to blend, how to hold a brush, how to look at my own face and let myself be tender with what I saw there. She taught me how to do my hair long before I had hair long enough to do. She taught me by pulling her own hair into styles and letting me practice on her. She taught me how to walk in flats before I trusted myself in heels, and the way she held my elbow when I wobbled was the way she held my elbow on the night we stood in the backyard, gentle and certain. She taught me how to read labels in stores, which aisles were safe to browse in, which clerks would be friendly and which would be rude, and she navigated me through my first time buying anything in the women's section with the coolness of someone who had done it 1,000 times for herself, because she had, and the language we used changed slowly. The pronouns she used for me in private got softer, and the name I had been carrying inside me started to slip out at random moments, and she would catch it and she would say it back to me, and each time she said it, the name felt more like a real thing. The big twist that I have to tell you now, the twist that makes this story not just a story about crossdressing but a story about becoming, came the night I told my parents. I waited almost 4 months, during which Ren and I had been slowly, carefully, lovingly expanding the truth about who I was, and during that time I had been doing what in the community we lovingly call girl moding, which is just a way of saying that when you are not yet out, you wear the clothes in the moments you can, in the privacy you can with the people you trust, and you let yourself expand into the person who has been waiting. Girl moding is its own little world, a milky, moonlit world of small truths that grow into large ones, and Ren held my hand through every minute of it. The night I told my parents, I sat on our couch, and Ren sat at the kitchen table, not intruding, just present, just a witness. just her, and I said the words I had been saving for years, and my mother's face did not change, but my father's face did, and the change on his face was not the change I had been afraid of. It was a kind of relief, like a man who had been carrying something heavy for someone else, and had just been asked to put it down. I do not want to make my parents into villains because they are not villains, they are people, the way all parents are people, and they have made mistakes and they have grown and they have learned. And the night I told them, my mother did not cry, but my father did, and he came over and he hugged me and he said, "We love you, we have always loved you, we just did not know how to love you the right way." I came out to my parents as a girl in the language that felt truest to me. I came out to my parents as their daughter, and I came out to them as Ren's partner because by then we had been going out for 6 months and the term girlfriend had become the word we both used, and the word girlfriend felt right because the person underneath it was finally right. The weeks after coming out to my parents were the weeks in which my world started to open up like a flower in a slow-motion video, and in those weeks Ren and I talked more honestly than we ever had. We talked about what it meant that I was a girl who loved a girl. We talked about the fact that our relationship had started before I knew who I was, and was now growing with me as I learned who I was. We talked about the people in our small town who would find it easier to love me as I was, and the people who would not. We talked about the future that neither of us had been able to imagine in the way it was now becoming possible to imagine. We talked about the possibility of living together. We talked about the possibility of traveling together. We talked about the possibility of getting married someday. And Ren said, in the middle of one of those nights, the one that mattered most, "Do not put that off as a someday, kiddo. Someday is a trap. Someday is just a fancy kind of never, and I do not want a someday with you." I will not tell you that everything was smooth after that. There were hard days. There were days when I looked in the mirror and the reflection did not look back yet. There were days when my voice sounded wrong to me. There were days when my body felt like a house that had been borrowed from someone else. There were days when being misgendered in public stung so badly that I wanted to crawl under the bed and stay there. There were days when the world reminded me that being a trans woman was still hard in this time, in this place, that some people would look at me wrong, that some people would refuse to call me what I am, that the road ahead was not going to be a parade. Ren held me through all of those days. Ren held me when my dysphoric spirals twisted me into shapes I could not unwind from. Ren held me when my hopes felt too big to carry. Ren held me when the world got small and mean. The big emotional twist that I have to tell you about now, the twist that turned this story from a love story into a transformation story, came the night Ren and I were lying on the floor of her room in the dark, talking about the future again, and I told her, "I want to transition. I want to make this body into my body. I want the hormones and the surgeries and the years of work that come with it. And I want you to be there with me through all of it." And Ren, in that same quiet, certain voice, said, "Then we start tomorrow." That was the night I knew I was going to marry her. I did not say it out loud, not then. But inside me the word had already formed, had already settled into its place, had already begun growing roots into the future I was trying to build. The transition itself is a story I will tell in movements rather than minutes, because the truth is that transition is not a moment. It is a long and slow and patient and courageous and exhausting work, and it is something I worked on every day for years, with the support of doctors and therapists and a community of other trans women I met online, and then in person, with the support of my parents and Ren's parents, and the few friends who made the choice to stay, with the support of a handful of teachers and a handful of co-workers, and the strangers who smiled at me when I walked into the women's restroom for the first time, and who pretended not to notice the small wobble in my step. The first movement was hormones. I started estrogen under the care of a Dr. Ren had found through a friend of a friend, and the first month I took the pill, I kept the bottle on my nightstand and looked at it every night before I went to sleep, the way you might look at a key that opens a door you have been waiting at for years. The second month my skin began to change just a little, just enough that I could feel it when I touched my cheek, and that small change felt like such a huge thing that I cried in the bathroom at work, and Ren texted me, "Proud of you, see you tonight," and I cried harder. The third month my chest began to develop soreness, the kind that comes before anything else, and Ren bought me a small, soft bralette in a color I had never worn before, dusty rose, and we tried it on together in her bedroom, and she said, "Your body is listening to you now, can you feel it?" And I could feel it, and I have never felt a better feeling. The second movement of the transition was voice, which is its own art form. I worked with a speech therapist for almost a year to learn how to use the voice I had been carrying inside me, the voice that I had been able to use in private but that I had not yet trained into a public instrument. And the work was slow, and I had bad days where my voice cracked in front of strangers, and good days where my voice sang on the radio in the car, and Ren clapped and said, "There she is, there's my girl." The third movement was hair, which I learned to grow out slowly, and which gave me a new kind of patience, the kind of patience that comes from waiting for a thing to become itself. And the fourth movement was the legal name change, which I did on a Tuesday afternoon at the courthouse in the larger town while Ren held my hand, and my new name was spoken out loud for the first time by a clerk who did not know what it meant, and who could not possibly have known how much it meant, and I cried in the car afterward, in a way that was different from every other cry I had cried in this story. Not sad, not relieved, just full, just the feeling of being full of yourself. The fifth movement was surgeries, plural, including the top surgery that gave me the chest I had been waiting for, and the consultations, and the bottom surgeries that I will not describe in detail because they are mine, not the world's, and the long recoveries that came with them. The weeks I spent resting on the couch with Ren bringing me soup and reading me chapters from the books I had been meaning to read. The months I spent walking around the apartment in soft pajamas with my chest bound in bandages. The year I spent learning to look at my own face and find the person I had been waiting for looking back at me. Ren was there for all of it. Ren was the one who helped me stand up the first time after surgery when my legs did not want to hold me. Ren was the one who drove me to every appointment and waited in every lobby and brought me magazines from the rack and read the recipes out loud when I could not sleep. Ren was the one who held my hand in the recovery room when the nurses asked me to rate my pain, and I could not speak, and Ren said 6 for me because she had been watching my face long enough to know. The big emotional twist I want to tell you about, the twist you can feel coming, is that somewhere in the middle of all of this, in the middle of the hormones and the surgeries and the slow and patient becoming, Ren proposed to me. She did it on the day I came home from my last big surgery. The day I felt the most fragile I had ever felt and the most whole I had ever felt at the same time, and she did it in the kitchen while I was sitting on the stool with my feet up because I could not stand for long, and she did not get down on one knee. She just stood in front of me with her hands behind her back and her eyes full of something that had been building for years. And she said, "I do not have a ring yet, but I have a question, and the question is, will you marry me? Will you marry me as yourself, as the person you have always been? Will you marry me as my wife? Will you marry me in whatever name you choose, and in whatever dress you choose, and in whatever future we can build from here?" And I said yes in the smallest voice I could make and in the largest voice I could make at the same time, and then she pulled the ring out from behind her back. It was not a ring from a store. It was a ring she had made by taking the class ring from her own high school years and taking it to a jeweler and having it resized and reset into something that looked like a piece of family, and I put it on my finger, and the ring was big for my finger because my fingers were smaller than hers, but she had known that, and the ring fit like a thing that had been made for me. The wedding is the part of this story that I want to tell you with all the detail I can muster, not because weddings are the point, but because the wedding was the moment when everything I had been doing became visible, the moment when the dress was not a costume, the moment when the name was not a secret, the moment when the woman walking down the aisle was not a boy in a dress, was not a girl playing pretend, was not a friend of a friend, was simply a person in love with another person in front of a small number of family and friends who had made the choice to be there. The dress was simple, a soft white, slightly off-white because pure white had never looked right on me, and it fell just below my knees and had small flowers sewn into the hem that Ren had done herself because she had been taking sewing lessons for a year in secret, planning the dress she was going to help me wear on the day she was going to marry me. The shoes were flats because I had never learned to walk in heels well enough to walk down an aisle, and Ren, who could walk in heels as well as she could walk in combat boots, walked down the aisle in flats too, because we had decided that we would match, that the wedding would be a matching day, that we would both be the truest versions of ourselves in the simplest ways we could. The aisle was short. The venue was a small chapel in the woods that a friend of Ren's parents owned. The guests were about 30 people, including my parents and her parents, and a handful of friends from our small town who had made the brave choice to be there, and a handful of friends I had made online, and a handful of the doctors and the therapist and the speech therapist and the community organizer who had helped me find work in the year before the wedding. And when I walked into the chapel, on the arm of my father, who had been practicing how to walk slowly for a week, my father cried in a way that did not embarrass him. in a way that made me feel like the most loved daughter in the room, and Ren, who was standing at the front with her hands clasped in front of her in the way she always did when she was nervous, looked up when I entered, and I saw her face change in a way that I will never be able to describe in any language other than the language of two people who have known each other since they were small and have chosen each other despite, and because of everything. The ceremony was short, and the officiant was a friend of ours from college who had just gotten her license to perform weddings, and the vows we said were the ones we wrote ourselves, and Ren went first because that was not the tradition we wanted. We wanted Ren to go first because she had been the one who walked into my life first, and she said, "I have known you since we were small, and I have loved you since I understood what love was. And I have loved you in every version of you I have ever met, and I have loved you in the versions of you I have not yet met, and I promise to keep loving you in the versions that come after today, even when those versions are hard, even when those versions are tired, even when those versions do not yet know what they are becoming. I will love them anyway. I will love them the way I have always loved them, with my whole stubborn, soft, ridiculous, gentle, certain heart." And I went next and I said, "You saw me before I saw myself. You held me before I could hold myself. You called me by my name before I had the courage to call myself by my own name, and I promise to keep living into the name you saw in me, and I promise to keep letting you see me even when the seeing is hard, and I promise to love you in the way you have always deserved to be loved, with my whole tired, brave, soft, loud, quiet, becoming heart." And then we kissed, and the small chapel full of small lights and small people and small joys went up in a sound I can only describe as a warmth, a kind of acoustic warmth that you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. And then we danced, just a little, just enough, just to that one slow song we had picked because it was the song we had been listening to in the Civic on the nights when we had been scared, and then we ate, and then we laughed, and then we sat at the head table and looked at each other for a long time in a way that did not need any words, and then my mother and her mother came up and each gave us a small speech, and the speeches were simple and full of the kind of love that comes from parents who have grown alongside their children, who have made mistakes and grown past them, who have learned that love is not a static thing but a moving thing that bends and stretches and reaches and finally arrives. I want to tell you about the things that happened after the wedding, the things that did not make the wedding day, but that made the wedding day worth living into, because the wedding was not the end, the wedding was the threshold, and beyond the threshold was the long and slow and beautiful work of being married, of being two people in the same home with the same name on the same lease, of being two people who had promised in front of small witnesses to keep showing up. We rented a small apartment in a larger town, the town we had driven to for our first dates, the town where I had bought my first skirt, and we filled the apartment with the things we had collected over the years, and I changed my last name to hers because I wanted a name that was not the name I had been given, because I wanted my name to be a name I had chosen, because I wanted the family I was joining to be a family that I had built with my own 2 hands and my own 2 years of becoming. Ren had been Ren to me first, and now Ren was my wife. And Ren was also part of my name, and when people saw my name on the mailbox they saw a woman living with another woman, and that was not news to anyone in the larger town. The larger town was the kind of place where that could be news and not news at the same time, where the queer couple 2 doors down was part of the texture of the neighborhood the same way the elderly man with the tomato garden was part of it. The big emotional moment I want to tell you about, the moment I think you will hold on to, came a few months after the wedding, when I went back to our hometown for the first time since moving. Ren came with me, because we had started doing everything together, even the hard things, and we drove the highway that we had driven 100 times before, and we pulled into the parking lot of the convenience store where we had bought our terrible canned drinks the night we had watched the fireworks from the garage roof, and we went inside to buy a bottle of water and a snack, and the clerk, who had been working there for 15 years, and who had watched us grow up without ever really seeing us, looked at me and said, "You're one of the Roberts kids, aren't you?" And I said, "No, but I used to know her." And the clerk said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you just look like her." And Ren, who was standing next to me holding my hand, said, in that same quiet, certain voice, "She's the Roberts girl. She just looks like herself." And the clerk did not understand what that meant, but I did, and Ren did. And the world in that little convenience store was not a hostile world. It was just an unobservant world. It was a world that had not yet given a name to what it was seeing, and one day it would, but that day was not this day, and this day was okay because Ren had said it, Ren had put it into the air, and the air had held it. We drove back to our apartment that night, and we sat in our living room in the dark, and Ren asked me, the way she did sometimes when the dark invited the truth up, "Do you ever regret any of it?" And I thought about it. I thought about the night on the roof. I thought about the night in her bedroom mirror. I thought about the night in the kitchen when she proposed. I thought about every single hard day and every single soft day and every single in-between day. And I said, no, I do not regret any of it, because every single piece of it brought me here. And here is exactly where I want to be, here with you, here in this apartment, here in this body that is finally mine, here in this name that is finally mine, here in this marriage that is finally ours. And Ren said, good, because I do not have any regrets either, and if we did, we would have to schedule a meeting to discuss them, and I do not have time for a meeting. I have a wife to love. And I laughed, and she laughed, and we laughed together in the dark, and the laughter was the kind of laughter that comes from two people who have been through the same hard thing, and have come out of it with the same hard-won joy. I want to tell you, at the end of the story, the things I have learned, the things I would tell a younger version of myself if I could, the things I would tell any person reading this who has not yet begun the work of becoming themselves. I would tell you that the costume is not the truth, that the name you have been given is not the only name, that the body you have been handed is not the only body, that the love you have been told does not exist as exist, that the life you have been told is not for you, is for you, is just for you, is just waiting for you to say yes to it. I would tell you that the people who love you will not always love you the right way at first, and that this is not always because they do not love you, but because they have to learn a new language to love you in, and that learning a new language takes time, and that you have to give them time, and that you also have to give yourself time. I would tell you that the path is not linear, that there are days when the path bends back on itself, and you have to walk the same stretch of road twice before you can move forward, and that those days are not failures, they are just steps. I would tell you that finding the right person to walk the path with is not the luckiest thing that can happen to you, that finding the right person to walk the path with is the work of showing up as yourself over and over until the right person finds you and recognizes themselves in your silhouette. The final words I want to leave you with are the words I would say to the Ren who was sitting next to me on the roof that first night, the Ren who did not laugh when she said yes, the Ren who did not push when I started to cry, the Ren who handed me a dusty rose bralette and stood next to me in front of the mirror and said, hi. I would say to that Ren, thank you for choosing me before I knew myself. Thank you for waiting for me to catch up to you. Thank you for becoming my wife in front of 30 people in a small chapel that smelled like pine. Thank you for becoming my wife in the years that followed that small chapel in every way that marriages become real. I would say, thank you for being the one person who saw the soft thing in me before I could see it, and thank you for holding that soft thing while it grew into the harder and softer thing it was going to be. I would say, I love you in every way I have learned to love, in the way of the second-grade friend who shared a milk carton with me, in the way of the teenager who held my hand across the high school courtyard, in the way of the woman who held my hand across the threshold of our apartment, in the way of the wife who is going to hold my hand across whatever threshold comes next. And to the person reading this who has not yet begun, who is sitting in their own costume and feeling the loosening of the seams, who is wondering if there is a Ren waiting for them somewhere, who is wondering if the name in their chest is going to come out someday, who is wondering if the dress on the rack is going to be there someday, who is wondering if the chapel is going to be there someday, I want to say, yes. I want to say, yes, it is yours. It has always been yours. You just have not yet given yourself permission to claim it. I want to say, there is a Ren for you. There is a doorway for you. There is a moment in the mirror when the reflection will look back at you with no makeup, no costume, no performance, and the reflection will say hi, and you will say hi back, and that is the moment everything will start. I want to say, do not put it off, do not schedule it for someday. Someday is a trap. Someday is just a fancy kind of never, and you deserve more than a never. You deserve an always, and the always is waiting for you, and the always is patient, and the always is yours. This is the story I came here to tell you, the story of how I asked my lesbian friend out and ended up her wife, the story of how a girl who had been kept inside a costume walked out of the costume with the help of the girl who saw her first, the story of how two people who had always loved each other learned to love each other in the language that was truest to both of them, the story of how a wedding was not the end but the threshold, the story of how the life that comes after the threshold is the life that you keep working into being for the rest of the days that are given to you. The story of how the woman in the dress was not a boy in a dress, was not a girl playing pretend, was not a friend of a friend of a friend, was simply a person in love with another person in front of a small number of people who had chosen to show up. The story of how the woman in the dress walked down the aisle on the arm of her father, who had once not known how to love her, and who had learned. The story of how she kissed her wife under a small chapel full of small lights and small people and small joys. The story of how her wife looked at her with eyes that held no surprise because her wife had always seen her coming. The story of how the door that was never supposed to opened for her because she asked for the door to open, and the door was the door to herself, and the door to herself was the door to the love of her life, and the love of her life was waiting on the other side of the door with a ring made from a class ring and a smile made from years of patience and a kiss made from the kind of love that you build slowly in the dark when no one else is watching. So this is the story. This is the whole story, from the small town to the small chapel to the small apartment, from the costume to the dress to the wedding dress, from the boy who is not a boy to the girl who is always a girl to the wife who is finally a wife, from the friend who became the girlfriend, who became the fiancée, who became the wife. From the milk carton in the second grade, to the cans of terrible drinks on the garage roof, to the ring with the class ring stone, to the kiss under the pine-scented chapel, to the long and slow life after. I have no regrets in the story, and I have no apologies to make for the story. And if you have walked a road that sounds like this road, I want you to know that the road is not over when you think it is, and the road opens in ways you cannot predict, and the road will give you the family you did not know you were missing, and the family will hold you, and the family will love you, and the family will keep walking with you until the road becomes the kind of thing you can call home. Thank you for listening to the story. Thank you for sitting with me while I told it. Thank you for staying through the slow parts and the fast parts and the soft parts and the hard parts, and thank you, especially, for staying through the part where I asked Ren out, because that was the part where this whole thing began, and the part where this whole thing began is the part that I will always hold closest to my heart.